I did my presentation on White Noise by DeLillo. Jack Gladney is the main character in the story who is a college professor that teaches Hitler studies. He actually started this field of study at his college, and two of the most important things to him is his wife and his standing at his college. He describes his wife as an amazing person and how much he respects her. He talks about how much better she is than his previous wives, and Jack often questions who would die first in their relationship. This foreshadows one of the main themes in the book, which is death. When Jack created Hitler Studies, his boss convinced him that he should change his persona so that way he would seem more as a credible teacher. His boss basically wanted Jack to make himself seem more powerful and masculine so that way it would somehow increase his credibility as a Hitler teacher. Power of looks is a common theme throughout the book. This book shows how the way we look can affect the way we think, and more importantly, how others think of us. Something as simple as making us look more manly can make us seem like a more trustworthy teacher, or if we were wearing raggedy old clothes, people would see us as a poor and dangerous. This book also talks about how things become important or interesting just because we make them that way. The best example of this is in the beginning of the book, where Jack and his college professor friend Murray go to a tourist barn. The barn that has had the most pictures taken of it. The only thing that makes this barn interesting is the fact that many people have seen it and taken pictures of it. With its fame of people going and seeing it, caused more people to go and see it, thus creating an endless loop of fame, only because it has fame. A toxic cloud then arises from a chain yard near his house, a dangerous chemical called neodine D. His son Heinrich tries to convince his dad that they are in danger, but Jack just continues on as if nothing has happened. Jack says that nothing dangerous could happen in such a small town like theirs. Jack continues to convince his family to ignore the warnings given out over the TV and radio, and tells his family that he is the chair of a college and that he is smarter than the people on the radio. But you have to remember, he's the one who created the chair position he has. He eventually leaves his house when a fire marshal tells them to evacuate. Over the radio, they describe the symptoms of exposure, and two of his daughters are having some of them. But Jack is skeptical as to whether these are real symptoms or if they are placebo caused by knowledge of the symptoms. Throughout the majority of the book, Jack constantly denies evidence that is brought up. He sees himself as a super smart person and uses his job as a professor to validate his logic. This mentality is eventually what causes him to get infected, do stupid things, such as trying to kill his wife's cheating partner and doing things that put him and his entire family in danger. And right after finding out that his children might get infected, he finds out that his wife had been sleeping with another man. And the reason she was doing it was so she could get drugs. And when Jack presses her about what she's taking, she admits that she's using an experimental drug called Dylar that's supposed to take away the fear of death. It turns out, throughout the entire book, Babette has had a crippling fear of death. So is Jack. Jack demands to know who Babette's drug dealer is, but she won't tell. It's only by pure accident that Jack finds out that the guy's name is Willie Mink and that he's staying in a nearby motel. After a short conversation with his buddy Murray, Jack decides that the only way to overcome his fear of death is to kill Willie Mink. That might seem a bit drastic, but it kind of makes it a little bit more interesting. He had several options. He could have, if he feared death so much, he could have tried doing what his wife did, which is get drugs to avoid it, but he decides that killing the person who gave the drugs is a better solution. And so for whatever reason, he decides that the way he's going to do it is to kill the Babette's dealer. Perhaps he thinks that killing someone or watching them suffer as they die will help him understand something or give him some perspective on death itself. Or maybe he thinks it will make him feel like him dying won't be so unfair if he gets to take someone else who he might believe is deserving of death with him as well. Whatever the reason, when he does find Mink, he shoots him in the stomach and then attempts to make it look like a suicide by putting the gun in his hand. Except the only problem with that was he didn't actually kill Mink. Mink was still alive. And so Mink, with the gun in his hand, shot Jack. And when Jack was shot, he realized that he didn't want Mink to die. He didn't want Mink to suffer. And so he takes Mink to the hospital where Mink recovers, and Jack starts to realize how death and fear of death can affect a person. If Mink had not shot Jack, he probably would not have tried to save Mink. Him getting shot affected him more psychologically than it did physically, and it changed Jack forever. And then towards the end of the book, Babette's son Wilder drives his tricycle down a busy highway and barely makes it out alive. This event makes Jack think about how children and adults view death and the world in general so differently. It is similar to how near the beginning of the book, Jack may not have known he feared death or may not have feared it at all until he was exposed to the toxic gas and realized how powerless he was to prevent his premature death. It haunted him and changed him until he eventually overcame it from witnessing what it's like to truly suffer from dying, and what it's like to never know you are at risk of death at all. He realizes that fear of death can change the way you do everyday tasks and end up causing more harm than they prevent. He realizes that you are not really living if you are living in fear of death. And throughout this book relates to modern fiction because it talks about death and more depressing themes. In this book, death was looming over every character throughout the entire book. Jack got infected with a poisonous gas with no known time when he would die. His wife cheated on him to get pills that would make her forget about her fear of death, and Jack even tries to kill someone, and only then does he realize how he truly feels about death. This book is a prime example of how people started to question the way people thought about life and death, and the extremes people would go through to try and find answers. You can tell it is a more modern piece because in the story it is the woman who cheats on the man, when historically in the past it was almost always the man cheating on his wife. This book made me think about just how important death is and how we revolve the way we think around it.